Hi, I'm JJ. Welcome. Today I wanted to do a wrap up so far of what I've read in August, just because if I wait till the whole end of August, I'm going to have way too many books to talk about, and this video is going to be way longer than it already is going to be. So this month I'm still reading one book. I did not finish one book, and I did finish 9. So the one I didn't finish is Airman Mortensen, and that's by Michael Blake. It was he wrote Dances with Wolves and The Holy Road, which I enjoyed both of those very much. I was expecting to like this one. It was not at all what I was expecting, and I just didn't want to continue. I'm still reading SPQR. That's gonna be a long time going, just because it's about Rome, the history of Rome, and I am enjoying it. It's just so dense that I have to kind of take it in stride. And so what I do like about it so far is the idea that the author deposits that Rome has never fallen. So many things about America, including the when we wrote our Constitution and wanted our independence and everything, like, we were inspired by the Republic of Rome. So in many ways, the best parts of Rome have lived on. Unfortunately, some of the worst parts lived on too, because, you know, at the time, 2/3 of the Roman Empire's population were enslaved people. So they and I guess if you're using that as a founding of a new nation, you're not gonna be as considered about the fact that we have slavery. So once again, the best and the worst parts. Another thing that was kind of interesting that I didn't realize, there was a lot of in there about Cicero, which I'm not overly familiar with, so I enjoyed learning about him, and I would like to do more research on him. But it was talking about how the inception of Rome, there was only a couple thousand people, and then by the end of the 6th century, there was only between 20 and 30,000 people. Especially when you're saying 2/3 of that being enslaved people. So the Roman Empire wasn't as big as even the, you know, contemporaries at the time, like Livy and people who were writing about it, were exaggerating their population, because they needed to exaggerate their armies, and they needed to make them seem formidable. I mean, they were, and fearful. And so that would be part of the you know, a juggernaut of, you know, their population and stuff. But really, they weren't overly, you know, a huge population for how big the empire was. And so I just thought that was interesting fact to realize, because, you know, when you think of a city, the city of Rome, the structures, what kind of population they could endure, and how they could feed it, how they could support it and stuff, it wouldn't have been able to be so huge at that time. So I just, you know, I guess maybe it's just me, but I always just thought Rome was huge and vast, and I guess I never really consider it just in scale, in the proper scale. So I'm still reading that. I'm probably just gonna slowly make my way through that throughout the rest of the month. I did finish The Moon is Down, but I did a completely separate video for that, for Steinbeck Summer, that I'll post later this week, probably on Friday. And then the other ones that I finished, I did 2 nonfiction history, which is maybe why I felt bogged down by the Roman one, just because it was a lot of facts all at once, and I kind of needed a break. So I listened to The Children of Ash and Elm by Neil Price, and that was Viking history. I did enjoy that. It was interesting. I really enjoyed the parts that talked about their religion and their creation mythology and stuff, which is where ash and elm come from. Their creation myth involved tree, made it, tree people, I guess, made live. They were breathed, life was breathed into the trees. I guess now that I'm thinking about it, I knew Tolkien had very big, heavily influenced by Norse mythology, but I guess I never, until now, just this moment, made the comparison to his tree people, which I forgot the name of right now. But I guess I think that that's fascinating, and I'm gonna have to give more thought to that. But I also enjoyed the parts where they were talking about the religious tolerance in Viking history, and how they accepted a lot of other countries coming in. Yes, they pillaged and they raped and they did all kinds of really bad stuff. But as far as religious tolerance, they were quite tolerant. Especially, it was interesting since I had just read that book about the history of Islam, to now hear about the Islamic expansion that went through the Norse countries, and how they impacted that, and just their settlement there, and how they were accepted there and stuff. And I just found that interesting. And also what I found fascinating was like, I already knew that Vikings were here way prior to Columbus, but I found it fascinating when they were talking about one story where there was somebody, I believe Iceland, when somebody was found, they found a dead, like, the bones and stuff, and there was a arrow stuck in the back. So he went to America, got shot on one of his encounters with the indigenous tribes there, and then came back and he died there with the arrow in his back. So when archaeologists found the body and stuff, it was arrowhead indigenous to the United States. So, like, what more proof do you need that they were here pre-Columbus? But I love how everything kind of intertwines in history. We are very much a much smaller world than we realize, and we're all interconnected. So that's why I like history so much. Another thing that I always find fascinating, especially not just when you're talking about Vikings, but Vikings did when they were going to Europe and England specifically, and they were pillaging the coastlines. They pillaged churches. Like, that's where they got a lot of their gold and stuff. And I just find that fascinating throughout history. Like, whenever you hear, the barbarians, the Goths, like the Visigoths, the like all the different tribes all know, like, the place that has the most money is not like the castle, it's the churches. And I think that's very telling in society, and something that should be explored, because if they weren't hoarding all of the gold and stuff, then maybe there wouldn't need to be as much pillaging, because the neighboring tribes and communities who needed stuff would have been helped. But I don't know, that's just maybe wishful thinking, but it just does make you wonder, like, the fact that they knew these places, they didn't even understand, like, what monasteries were, what churches were. Like, a lot of times when they first pillaged them, they just were pillaging, and then they found so much gold and so much stuff they could steal that word spread, and they knew what to target. And eventually they obviously realized what they were targeting. But I guess I find that fascinating. Another thing that was interesting to me was it will be talked about in my next book that I read, but just how all of the things that I enjoy kind of intercept. And so you had them invade England, and obviously we have, that's very well told, but then they were very, they went along the coast of Ireland and everything as well. And then it was interesting to hear about the founding of Iceland and, not the founding, but I guess their settlement of Iceland and Greenland. And I think it's very also interesting, like when you talk about the Vikings and you need to talk about slavery, and they had slaves just like all the other cultures at that time and well beyond that time. But that's how it got intermingled a lot, is, you know, a lot of times women were the ones who were taken as slaves for obvious reasons. And so therefore a lot of the countries had all this mixed lineage. And now they're starting to understand why, when they explore, you know, the slavery aspect of it, that it wasn't just people integrating and moving in and having this neat little package of like, yeah, you know, and or even war and stuff. It was, you know, taking of women from the cultures that they occupied or conquered, and then mating with them, using them, and breeding with them, and then having that population now combined. And so many ancestrage sites and stuff, like you'll see where you come from, but it's so much more complicated than just you were here, you know, like you have to think about all that. And I guess I find that interesting. I don't know if anyone else does. I thought it was a very interesting book. I didn't enjoy it as much as I did the Islamic one. I feel like maybe the Islamic one, it was more stuff that I wasn't as more aware of, or maybe even just the writing style flowed together better. But I did enjoy that one more. But then right after I finished this one, I read The Story We Carry in Our Hearts by Juliene Osborne-McKnight. And that is actually, I gave it it was almost a 5-star book for me, just personally. So it's an Irish history book. But as my other stories, other videos and stuff, I've been kind of comparing the Irish aspect to it, just because I find it fascinating, all the different places that they show up. And so I finally was reading, I found this Irish history book. And so it's actually geared towards Irish Americans to talk about their diaspora, but it gave a great overall view of Irish history in a way that was accessible, I very much enjoyed it. It gave me enough to want to do research on certain aspects to get more information, but it still gave a very well-rounded, complete Irish history. And I would recommend it if anyone else is interested in history, and specifically Irish history. So some of the things that I wanted to share that I learned from that book, because as you know me, I take notes. So the 16th century is when potatoes were introduced to the island of Ireland. They had come from Peru previously. So with all the colonization and all the traveling and stuff, that was one of the things that got passed along the world. So Ireland pre-potato famine, which was actually a genocide, attempted on purpose genocide when they refused to give aid and stuff. But there was 8 million people in Ireland prior, and then only 4 million left afterwards. 1 million or more that were killed, which is more than what died in the American Civil War. And the other 4 million emigrated. A large part settled in Liverpool, England, just because they made that huge trek to try to escape the famine, and then were too tired to continue on elsewhere, so they just settled there. And then the ones who did continue on, they went to Australia, Canada, and the United States, the majority of the population. And so many of those who did travel died en route, because they died on the ships that were colloquially called coffin ships. It was very treacherous. They described it as like very eerily similar to the slave ships, but like even more packed with people because they were all trying to escape. So they were too overpacked, and then sanitary conditions and everything made it bad. You know, they died with all kinds of diseases there. They didn't survive the ship, the travel on the ship, and all that different stuff. So then when they finally get, and this is going to be specifically in America because it was geared, as I said, to Irish Americans. But when they finally get to America, then there's all this discrimination that they face there. So they not only are facing discrimination because they're Irish, which at the time they were viewed as non-white, essentially subpar humans. They were also Catholic, which just blows my mind, the fact that America was supposedly settled by people who escaped religious intolerance and then discriminated their entire existence against the wrong, you know, who they viewed as the wrong religions, which is so... anyway, so it wasn't very far removed from the actual Reformation. So the Puritans and stuff had this very bad intolerance for the Irish, which then transferred for generations as Protestants continued to hate the Irish. And note of fact, in the 1920s, the KKK at that time, when it was reintroduced as anti-Catholic and anti-Irish, that's where the cross burnings occurred, is because they were basically burning their crosses, saying that they were not true Christians. They weren't the right kind of Christians. They were essentially, I mean, when we see in the movies, we see it as, you know, them targeting the Black people with crosses and stuff. And I guess I never made the connection that it wasn't actually the Black people that they started targeting with the crosses. It was the Irish Catholics. And so just to assume that they were heretics because they were Catholic, and then worthy to be, you know, killed for it. And so when they finally got jobs, because when they first came in by the droves, there was a whole bunch of people who came in prior to the potato famine, and then there was the group of people that came in after. So there was even this discrimination between people, and this is when it gets kind of confusing. And so we used to always say Native Americans for the indigenous people, and there was people of Irish descent who settled prior to the potato famine, who then considered themselves nativists. So they were Native American. And so it kind of gets complicated. So they considered themselves nativists, and they were against the new Irish who were coming, because they thought it was going to keep them from jobs and from properly immigrating, and it was going to bring back the hatred and stuff towards them. So there was even this, you know, the inner fighting amongst Irish themselves. And so it was also, so at this time when they had a lot of the discrimination, they would have signs in the doors of shops and stuff when they were hiring, and they say, no Irish need apply. So there was no work for them, and a lot of them were fleeing. They were uneducated. They didn't speak English. And so they had to do all the hard backbreaking labor, like actual backbreaking labor. So some of the work that they got, they built 400 miles of canals, and this was interesting from my point of view as being from someone from Michigan, that they built a lot of the canals that run the Great Lakes to the other rivers and stuff across the country. They built a lot of canals in Pennsylvania and stuff, connecting those lakes and rivers. And they built railroads with the Chinese immigrants. And there is even a song, which I'll link below, at least the title of it. But it was talking about like the last mile of stretch that was the most dangerous. There was essentially like a massacre that happened there that they had to try to cover up and just get rid of the bodies because they didn't want the publicity of having it known that so many people were killed. And there was also they were bricklayers. They also built the Brooklyn Bridge, and they did that with Italian and German immigrants. And so the Brooklyn Bridge had to be constructed below the water. And so a lot of people drowned and died, and which I didn't realize, because I didn't realize you could get it when the water is not, deep like the ocean. But a lot of them got the bends, which I talked about how bad that is in an earlier book review when I was talking about the Turtles of the Midnight Moon, which was about the lobster hunters in Honduras. And so that was very interesting to learn that you could get the bends from trying to build the bridge underground or underwater as well. They also built the Empire State Building with Native Americans, so indigenous Americans. They also built the subway systems in New York City. And so, as if you didn't already know, it is a really great reminder that America was built by enslaved people, immigrants, and the forced labor of indigenous people. And so that's what's really frustrating about what's going on in America now with all these forced deportations, and then what we call Alcatraz, and how we dehumanize all these immigrants who they say are criminals, and they say are just short of human, when our whole country exists because of them. And so the Irish women immigrants, so they worked as domestics and mill and factory girls. Domestics were in the houses of well-to-do people. One of note was Emily Dickinson hired Irish domestics to work for her. And the mill and factory girls, they got to make money. And it's really important because they actually helped with the integration and the better acceptance of Irish immigrants as a whole, because they were able to socialize and make money. They attended mass. They actually learned manners that they could then pass on to their Irish husbands when they married, and therefore kind of help integrate them better into society, which was interesting. Another thing interesting to note that I enjoyed, the little kind of crossover, was when they were talking about, so Ireland was, at one time, they were invaded by the Vikings, and as I said, Vikings would pillage the churches and all stuff all around the coasts. And then after the Vikings, the Normandy invasion and all that stuff. And so they were 600 years of continuous invasions. And then one of my favorite time periods is the Tudor dynasty time period. So what the Tudor family did to the Irish, starting the war. And Mary then was responsible for, like, they thought, oh good, another Catholic on the throne means that maybe we won't be persecuted the way we have been. But then she went and started establishing essential small colonies, plantations that she then sent English people to live on, and that's where you had the English barons that the Irish escaped to go to America for. And then that's when you had, when I was talking about Cattle Kingdom, and they were moving out west, and they're trying to get away from these English barons who now were kind of trying to be cattle barons when they were buying up land in the United States, the western part of the United States. So like I said, it's all interconnected, which I found really fascinating. And so I really enjoyed this book a lot. It was my favorite read of the month, or so far, besides The Moon is Down, which I said I will be talking about in a later video. And then the other books that I read, just real quick, A Confession by Leo Tolstoy. It was just a small, like, essay memoir type of thing where he was talking about life and faith and death. And it was interesting, his take on what religion is and how what faith means, and how you should live a life of meaning, and how so many things in life are meaningless. And therefore he contemplated suicide and all that stuff, because making all this money as a famous writer, but then feeling like he was not actively living as he should have been, was interesting. Not great, just it was kind of cool to hear his inner dialogue. I would like to do a comparison of his thoughts about religion with C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. Maybe I'll do that sometime. The two that I listened to that are classics were the Death of the Heart by Elizabeth Bowen. This is my first Elizabeth Bowen book. This book I did not particularly love or anything. I just thought it was an average book. But I did like her writing style enough that I think that I might try her other works. I just didn't like this one, like the execution and stuff. It was essentially a young girl who goes to live with her uncle. I think she was orphaned, but she meets this boy who kind of is a playboy type of thing, and she's a young girl, so she falls for it. And it was really interesting how she wrote about manipulation and essentially psychological abuse, and how they kept gaslighting her and stuff like that. So I did think that part was fascinating, but the story itself was a bit too long and drawn out with nothing really happening. Yes, they were setting up for that conclusion and stuff, but I just felt like I was a bit disappointed in that. The other one I was a bit disappointed with was Villette by Charlotte Brontë. It was my second Charlotte Brontë, having read Jane Eyre. Quick note about Jane Eyre. I read that more recently. I didn't read it years ago, but in 2000 and 2001, I was in New York City at the time, and they had a off-Broadway Jane Eyre play. And I watched it twice. I watched it by myself, and then when my mom and my grandma came to visit, I took them to it. And I was just obsessed with that musical. I still will reference, or in my head think of the music and stuff there. The music is haunting and phenomenal. So I was even a bit disappointed when I read the book finally, just because I had such a strong reverence for those songs. But anyway, I do very much enjoy the way Charlotte Brontë writes. I just don't always enjoy her entire book or story. Nothing against her, just my own personal preference. What was interesting about this one, though, is that it had an almost bit of a gothic theme with she kept seeing ghosts. Specifically a nun, and another part that was interesting, and I think they go together, is one of her love interests was a Catholic to her being Protestant. And so I thought that talking about the different religions, especially having just told you about the religious persecution and stuff amongst the Catholics in Ireland and stuff like that. So like that part probably was the most fascinating to me in this book. Just like her trying to figure out her own faith, and then how to love somebody or possibly be with somebody who has a different faith. And so I think that her seeing the ghosts, the nuns, I think that was her internal struggle with Catholicism, like her trying to wonder if either wondering if she's wrong by pursuing someone who's Catholic, not being Catholic, or if she were struggling with conversion and if she wanted to convert or something. Like I think that was more of an internal struggle. That's just my interpretation. I could be completely wrong, but knowing that was my interpretation, I enjoyed that part of the storyline. And I will say that I do enjoy, this was considered a an autobiography novel. Like it was semi-autobiographical, I guess you would say. And so I love that as a genre. I really loved Charles Dickinson's David Copperfield. Fantastic. I enjoyed, didn't love, but I did enjoy Of Human Bondage by W. Somerset Maugham. I just, as a genre, I feel like I've read a lot of those books where, you know, the self-insert, this is my life, but I don't really want to say this is my life type of story. I find it fascinating what they choose to keep and what they choose to like sensationalize and make it so that it's not recognizable. I personally enjoy that as a novel genre, but I did not thoroughly enjoy it in this novel. And then let's see, I also just finished In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. I also thought this one was just okay. It's basically a memoir talking about the breakdown of a queer relationship. So it's her relationship with her very abusive girlfriend. And so I thought what it was trying to do was very interesting. She had a lot of domestic violence facts and stuff, like and queer history wrapped into it, of how a lot of times when LGBT people were inserted in film and movies and books and stuff, they were the villains, or they were coded queer people that were the villains. And then she also talked about how new domestic violence laws are, and how women used to not have to, or not have that right to escape that kind of life, and how hard it is, even with those laws in place, to get out of that kind of relationship. So that portrayal and that aspect was absolutely important and engaging and interesting. And she wrote it, each chapter was just a specific story breakdown of their relationship, not interconnected, and you know, there's no linear thing. It was just kind of vignettes of it, and that I enjoyed that writing style. Very lyrical. The writing at times could be very beautiful. What I did not enjoy about it was how crass the language and crude it was when depicting sex, and it did that far too often for my enjoyment. But as a story itself, I thought it was impactful and important. I just didn't personally enjoy every aspect of it. So the other two that I wanted to discuss, I think there was only two. Yes. So they're ones that I have here. So this one is Glitch Girl by Rainie and so this is also written in verse, which was interesting, but it is following a non-binary kid. I think he was, or they, sorry, I think they were like 12 or 13. And it was interesting because it dealt very well with ADHD in ways that I didn't always understand, like the way that they described what living with ADHD was like, and how they saw the world like a broken mirror, and so you saw everything at once, and so it became too overwhelming. I thought that was a very, very beautiful way to describe it. And how also sometimes they would self-destruct just because they would be told over and over that they were bad because they did bad things. But that didn't make them bad. It took the whole book for them to realize that who they were as a person with ADHD and being non-binary, gender non-conforming, that they're not horribly bad people. And it took them just a very long time and meeting another non-binary kid to understand that about themselves. So I thought it was interesting. It was very erratic the way that it was written, but I think it was to emphasize the ADHD aspect, which I thought was an interesting way to go about that. So I enjoyed it enough. It was good. It was better than okay, but not great. And another one that I finished, and I have finally got to this one. It's the Civil War of Amos Abernathy, and this one was one that I unwrapped for my blind date with the book, and I finally got to reading it, and I really did enjoy this one. I actually learned a lot for it being about this kid who is I think he was also 13, and he was 13. So I think that the other kid, Jay, was younger than 13, because I know Amos was 13. And so this was interestingly written as well, because it was written, the letters he wrote to Civil War hero were a year ago, and then the current events are now. And so it kind of, the letters go back in time to try to eventually bring you up to date as the stuff happens, mostly all in one day. And so you have to reach that timeline, the current timeline. And so what was interesting about this book, first of all, the Civil War, he was a Civil War reenactor, but the Civil War he's talking about is actually like the Civil War inside all of us, as we are struggling with identity, with race, with religion, with all kinds of different stuff that we have going on in our lives that make who we are challenging and difficult and different. So I thought that was an interesting play on the words there. And so another way that I found this fascinating is the soldier that he was talking about was a trans soldier, Albert DJ Cashier. So once again, bringing it back to the Irish. So he was a immigrant from Ireland who came just before the war at age 18, and he was not born a man. So he came, he enrolled in the war as Albert. He came to America as Albert. He lived after the war as Albert. So in every aspect, he was a trans man. And then you just get to kind of hear his life, and at the very end you get to hear more about his life, which I really enjoyed. It also let me know about some people that and things that I didn't for sure know about, because his best friend is a black girl, who was a really great character because she was also very obsessed with blacksmithing, which I obviously very much appreciate. She wanted to be the first blacksmith, first black woman blacksmith at this reenactment place. And I found that absolutely, yes, good, go for her, good for her. And then it has him getting a crush for the first time on a boy. And it was interesting because the boy, he and the boy both go to different churches in the same town. And his church is a religious tolerant one. And his best friend, or the boy he likes, is not. They're very, like conversion therapy, every, very backwards, racism and sexism and homophobia and all that stuff. So it was really hard for them to try to, I guess, find themselves and understand their own, like Amos was out and he had support, but the other boy did not. And so that was an interesting thing that went throughout the story, especially as they're exploring other LGBT people within history. And so they listed a whole bunch of ones. And one that was a possibility that I didn't realize that I did more research after and stuff was the possibility that Abraham Lincoln and James Garfield might not have been straight. So there's a lot of people that we overlook, a lot of people that we just don't, a lot of things that we don't think about. And one of the things they mentioned was, so there was also in Illinois, which is where this took place, it was a free state by 1818, but white people were still able to own slaves if they worked in the salt mines, which I just thought that was an interesting fact just because I didn't know about that, but also because being from Michigan, I had already told you guys about the salt mines and stuff, so I just never even made the connection that there would be enslaved people working down there. And it also talked about the Free Frank McWhorter was the first African American to ever found a town in the United States, and he did that in Illinois in 1836. So there was just a lot of like really random and cool information that I enjoyed throughout this book, especially having it be geared towards younger people, to have them do this fight about they were trying to get their this place, which is basically not just Civil War reenactments, but it's the whole like park that has a bunch of 1800s stuff. So like the blacksmithing, they have a homestead and schools and all that stuff to show what life was like there. But they did not include lives of indigenous people. They did not include lives of black people. They did not include lives of queer people. And so he is coming to terms with that as he's growing up, realizing that this place that he loved growing up and respected and stuff might be missing parts of history. And he made a really good point about how people are thinking that we're rewriting history by trying to include all these stories never told before. And it's not that we're rewriting history, it's that we're finally telling a more complete version of history, whether we're telling their stories or not doing the Western white man lens. Like we're also including stories from like what really happened in Africa, what really happened in the Middle East and stuff like that. So we're not changing anything. We're just trying to make it right. We're trying to show what really happened rather than one person's version of it. And another thing that was interesting that I always think about, but it was cool to have it written in simplistic words for kids, but he didn't understand how you could be not inclusive of everybody. Like he was specifically thinking about his experience as a cis queer white boy, but he didn't think about what his black female friend was going through and stuff like that. And so it talks about intersectionality and how you have to be not just standing up for your own rights, but for all rights. And so that's very important, especially when you're thinking, let's just say feminism today is typically white cis feminism. They're not taking into account trans women. They're not taking into account women of color when they're trying to get equality and all that stuff. So you can't be a proper ally if you're only fighting for what personally affects you, and rather than fighting for all people who are marginalized or oppressed. And so I thought that was a very important thing to include in this book, and I really enjoy that it's written for kids to grow up knowing to care and be empathetic and supportive and inclusive of the people around you, and maybe start questioning what's in your history books, what you've just automatically assumed or been told. So I do recommend this book, The Civil War of Amos Abernathy. So those are the books that I read this month. And then I also just briefly started 100 Years of Solitude, which is my buddy read with Angelina. So I'm finally going to be starting that. I briefly started Beartown, but I'm giving that a break so that I can make sure that I get to that one, to the 100 Years of Solitude. I'm about halfway through Human Acts, which is good, and about maybe 30 pages into Birth Canal, which was the Indonesian Women in Translation book that I'm reading. I stopped to do my poetry one and kind of never got back to that because I started these other ones. I just needed something a bit less after reading all those history books. And so that's why I read those YA books. So I'm hoping to get back on track for the rest of the month and see where I go. I do have a few ideas of things to add at the end if I do have time. And then I did want to share with you my reading plan for the audiobooks that I have coming up, because a lot of them are now going to be expiring at the end of this month, and I wanted to make sure I get to them. So along with the SPQR, which is the Roman one, is Alaric the Goth, which is the outside looking in on the Roman Empire, and it will kind of be a great companion book for that. Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy. I had not actually heard much about this book until Doug mentioned it, and so I found out that it's was free at least through the end of this month, so I'm definitely going to get to that one. There's a selected works of Audre Lorde. Sorry, I can't speak. Proust and the Squid. This one is interesting to me because it's more of like a psychology book, but when it's talking about Proust, I have read the first 2 volumes of In Search of Lost Time, so I am kind of fascinated with him as a person and stuff, so I don't quite know everything what that book is going to be about, but I love psychology. Another one is Dying Every Day, kind of speaks for itself. The Death of the Banker, and that's by Ron Chernow. I believe that one was about I don't think it was Morgan. It's not Morgan, but it was one of the other bankers. And I can't think of who right now. If I have time, I want to read Paris, France by Gertrude Stein. I believe it's just essays, but I've never read anything by Gertrude Stein, so I would like to. Christopher and His Kind. I would like to read. I believe that was by... I'll have to look that one up. I don't want to even guess and say that here. I didn't write it down. And then if I do have time, there was also a Jamaican romance called Here Comes the Sun. So I'm not sure I'll have time for that one, but those are the ones that are expiring at the end of the month that if I have time, I'm trying to get through some of those. So I did a lot of reading so far, lots of thinking about the reading. And I have a lot more to do, but thank you. If you stayed this long to listen, thank you.